Graham Cates, who has been essentially camped out outside of the courthouse for several days now. Graham, it's good to see you. First of all and foremost, what is your reaction to all of this? I mean, you were inside the courtroom where there was no cameras allowed. What do you make of these charges?
You know, I think when they were actually read out, we had heard that there were going to be something along these lines, but hearing the court clerk say, Donald Trump, you are charged with 34 counts of felony falsification of business records. I think the whole room kind of came to attention. Everyone understood what this means historically. This was a former president sitting in front of us in a seat that, over the years, thousands of criminal defendants have sat in.
All right, so what I'm about to tell you sounds like something out of a movie, but it's real and it's happening right now in courtrooms across America. We're talking about Donald Trump, a sitting president during his second term, getting so out of control in court that judges are openly discussing whether they're going to have to send baiffs and marshals to physically restrain him. Yeah, you heard that right. We've reached a point where judges are saying on the record that jail time is on the table, that handcuffs might be necessary, that courtroom security might have to step in and enforce the law by force because Trump refuses to follow the rules. This is absolutely wild.
The Supreme Court has rejected former President Donald Trump's emergency request to intervene in a dispute over classified documents seized from his Mar-a-Lago estate. The former president's legal team asked the High Court last week to weigh in on the case. They asked for a special master to vet classified documents seized by the FBI in August. That's the Trump team that asked for that. The court did not provide an explanation, though, for its denial. There were no noted dissents from the 9 justices. For more on this, let's bring in CBS News senior investigative correspondent Catherine Herridge. So, Catherine, what's the larger implication of this ruling?
Well, this was a very narrow legal ask, John. It was going to mean that sort of a pause would be in place on these classified records. But since the court is not taking up the issue, it means Justice Department investigators can continue with their review of these classified records.
And judges who have been incredibly patient up to this point are starting to hit their breaking point. They're warning Trump that if he doesn't stop, if he keeps defying court orders and disrespecting the process, they're going to have no choice but to bring in the baiffs and marshals and physically enforce compliance. And that means handcuffs. That means being removed from the courtroom. That potentially means jail time. Now, some people might think I'm exaggerating, but I'm not. This is actually happening. In one of Trump's New York cases, Judge Juan Merchan found Trump in contempt of court multiple times for violating a gag order. And Merchan didn't just slap him with fines and move on. He said, and this is a direct quote, that going forward, the court will have to consider a jail sanction. He said he doesn't want to incarcerate a former president, but he also said he will, if necessary, to uphold the rule of law. Think about that for a second. A judge openly telling Trump that jail is on the table. That if Trump keeps pushing, keeps defying orders, the next step is handcuffs and a cell. And legal analysts have already gamed out what that would look like. If Trump were jailed for contempt, even temporarily, he would be handcuffed. He would be processed just like any other defendant. He would be transported under special security arrangements because of his status as a former president and current sitting president. And all of that would involve marshals and courtroom security physically taking him into custody. So when I say Trump is refusing to cooperate with baiffs and courtroom authority, I'm not making it up. We're literally one bad courtroom outburst away from watching U.S. Marshals put handcuffs on a sitting president because he can't control himself. And it's not just one case. This pattern is happening across multiple courtrooms. In his civil fraud trial in New York, the one about him inflating his asset values, Trump has had full-blown meltdowns. We're talking 9-second outbursts where he's yelling at the judge, tearing up documents, cursing in open court, and judges in those cases have threatened to remove him from the courtroom entirely. They've authorized aggressive enforcement steps, like immediately seizing his properties. They're done playing nice. They're done pretending that Trump is going to suddenly start following the rules. They know he's not. So they're preparing for the moment when they have to make marshals and baiffs physically enforce the law. So in this video, we're going to break down exactly how close we are to that moment. We're going to look at Trump's pattern of courtroom defiance. We're going to talk about what judges have already said on the record about jail time and physical enforcement. And we're going to explore what it would actually look like if bailiffs had to step in and remove Trump from a courtroom or take him into custody. Because here's the thing, this isn't some distant hypothetical anymore. This is the next logical step. If Trump keeps doing what he's been doing, and based on everything we've seen, there's no reason to think he's going to stop. Stick around, because this is about to get really intense. Okay, so let's start with the most dramatic example we have so far. Judge Juan Merchan in New York. This is the judge overseeing one of Trump's criminal cases, and Trump has repeatedly violated a gag order that Merchan put in place to protect witnesses and court staff. The gag order was pretty straightforward. Trump wasn't allowed to publicly attack witnesses or make threatening statements about people involved in the case. But Trump being Trump, he ignored it. He posted on Truth Social. He gave interviews where he called witnesses liars and attacked prosecutors. He basically acted like the gag order didn't exist. So Merchant held him in contempt multiple times. And at first it was just fines, $1,000 here, a few thousand there. But those fines didn't work. Trump kept violating the order. And that's when Merchan made his warning. He said in open court, with Trump sitting right there, that the court would have to consider a jail sanction going forward. He said he understood the gravity of incarcerating a former president. He said it wasn't something he wanted to do. But then he said, and this is the key part, he will, if necessary, to uphold the rule of law. That's a judge telling Trump that if he keeps defying court orders, jail is the next step. Not more fines, not more warnings, jail. Now, when Mercian made that statement, it sent shockwaves through the legal world because judges don't say things like that lightly. When a judge says jail is on the table, they mean it. They're not bluffing. They're preparing the defendant and the public for what's coming next if the behavior doesn't change. And here's the thing, Trump's behavior hasn't changed. If anything, he's gotten worse. He's more defiant, more combative, more convinced that he's above the law. So the question isn't really if Merchant or another judge will eventually order Trump jailed for contempt. The question is when. And legal analysts have already walked through what that would look like. If a judge orders Trump jailed for contempt, even if it's just for a few hours or overnight to make a point, there's a whole process that kicks in. Trump would be handcuffed. That's standard procedure for anyone being taken into custody. He would be processed, fingerprinted, photographed, all of it. And because he's a former president and a current sitting president, there would be special security arrangements. He probably wouldn't be thrown into a general holding cell with other defendants. He'd likely be held in a separate secure area. But the point is, U.S. marshals or court baiffs would be physically taking him into custody. They would be the ones putting the handcuffs on. They would be the ones escorting him out of the courtroom. And all of that would happen because Trump refused to follow the rules. Now, let's talk about Trump's behavior in other courtrooms, because the Merchant case isn't an isolated incident. In the New York civil fraud trial, the one where the state accused Trump of lying about the value of his properties to get better loans, Trump has been an absolute disaster. There are multiple reports of him having what can only be described as meltdowns in court. We're talking about 90-second outbursts where he's shouting at the judge, where he's tearing up documents in front of everyone, where he's cursing and calling the proceedings a witch hunt, and generally acting like a child who didn't get his way. And the judge in that case, Judge Arthur Engoron, has not been amused. Engoron has threatened multiple times to remove Trump from the courtroom if he can't control himself. He's warned Trump's lawyers that their client's behavior is backfiring, that every outburst and every act of defiance just gives the court more reason to rule against him and impose harsher penalties. And Enron has also authorized really aggressive enforcement steps. When Trump's company was found liable for fraud, Enor immediately authorized the seizure of properties. No waiting, no appeals process, just take his assets. And if Trump had tried to physically interfere with that seizure, you better believe marshals and baiffs would have been involved. So what we're seeing across multiple cases is a pattern. Trump walks into court thinking he's in control. He acts like the judge works for him. He violates orders. He disrespects the process. And judges who are used to defendants trying to test boundaries are responding with increasingly serious threats. They're telling Trump that if he keeps going, if he keeps refusing to comply, they're going to have no choice but to use force. And that force comes in the form of baiffs and marshals, who are authorized to physically restrain defendants and remove them from courtrooms. Now here's where this gets really interesting. From a legal perspective, Trump's lawyers are in an impossible position. On one hand, they have to defend their client and argue that judges are being unfair or biased. That's their job. But on the other hand, they're watching Trump sabotage his own cases with his behavior. They're sitting there in court while Trump yells at the judge, knowing that every word out of his mouth is making things worse, and they can't control him. They've tried. There are reports of Trump's lawyers literally begging him to stop talking, to stop posting on social media, to just sit quietly and let them do their jobs. But Trump doesn't listen. He thinks he knows better. He thinks his defiance is strength. And so his lawyers are left trying to clean up the mess, while privately probably praying that a judge doesn't actually order their client hauled off to jail. And here's the really wild part. Trump seems to think this is all helping him politically. He goes back to Mar-a-Lago or wherever and tells his supporters that he's being persecuted, that the judges are corrupt, that the whole system is rigged against him, and his base eats it up. They see him fighting with judges and defying court orders, and they think he's standing up to the deep state or whatever. But here's what they're not thinking about. What happens when a judge finally says enough is enough and orders baiffs to remove Trump from the courtroom? What does that image look like? A sitting president being physically restrained by court officers. That's not strength, that's chaos. And it's going to be really hard to spin that as a victory. There's also a bigger constitutional question here that nobody really wants to talk about. Can a judge actually jail a sitting president for contempt of court? Legally, the answer is probably yes. Contempt of court is one of those powers that judges have to maintain order and enforce their rulings. And there's no explicit exception in the law for presidents. But practically, it's never been tested. We've never had a president who acted like Trump in court. We've never had a president who violated gag orders and yelled at judges and dared the system to do something about it. So, if it actually happens, if a judge orders Trump jailed and marshals have to take him into custody, we're going to be in completely uncharted legal territory. And that's terrifying, because think about what that would mean. You'd have a judge, part of the judicial branch, physically detaining the head of the executive branch. You'd have U.S. marshals who technically work under the executive branch being ordered by a judge to arrest their boss. You'd have a constitutional crisis playing out in real time on live television. And all because Trump couldn't follow basic courtroom rules. That's where we are. That's how close we are to a complete breakdown of norms and processes that have held our system together for over 200 years. So let's break down what all of this actually means, because the implications here go way beyond just Trump's legal troubles. First, we need to understand that what we're watching is a fundamental test of the rule of law. The principle that nobody is above the law, not even the president, is foundational to our entire system. And Trump is testing that principle in the most aggressive way possible. He's basically daring judges to enforce their orders. He's saying with his actions, what are you going to do about it? And judges are responding by saying, we will jail you if we have to. So this is a showdown between the judicial system's authority and Trump's belief that he's untouchable, and one side is going to win. If judges back down, if they decide that actually jailing Trump is too politically explosive or too complicated, then Trump wins. He proves that if you're powerful enough and defiant enough, you can ignore court orders and nothing will happen to you. And that would be catastrophic for the legal system. Because if Trump can violate gag orders and scream at judges and face no real consequences, why would anyone else follow the rules? You'd essentially be creating a two-tier justice system where regular people go to jail for contempt, but presidents get a pass. That's not rule of law, that's rule of power. But if judges follow through, if they actually order Trump jailed and baiffs have to physically take him into custody, then you've got a different set of problems. You've got the image of a sitting president in handcuffs. You've got a constitutional crisis. You've got Trump supporters losing their minds and claiming it's a coup or a deep state takedown. And you've got half the country convinced that the judicial system is politically weaponized against Trump. So there's no good outcome here. Either judges let Trump get away with contempt, which undermines the law, or they enforce the law and trigger a political firestorm. Trump has backed the system into a corner where every option is bad. Second, let's talk about what this means for Trump's political future. Right now, Trump is trying to play the victim. He's telling his supporters that judges are corrupt and the system is rigged, and he's fighting for them against impossible odds. And that narrative works to a point. His base loves it. They see him as a martyr. But here's the problem. That narrative falls apart if bailiffs have to physically remove him from a courtroom. Because at that point, it's not about persecution anymore. It's about a man who literally cannot control himself, who yells and curses and refuses to follow basic rules. And independents and swing voters, the people who decide elections, they're not going to see that and think he's strong. They're going to see it and think he's unhinged. And the timing here matters. We're heading into the 2026 midterms. Trump's party needs to hold Congress. They need to project competence and strength. And instead, they've got their leader throwing tantrums in courtrooms and getting threatened with jail. That's not a winning message. That's not something you can build a campaign around. So every time Trump has a courtroom meltdown, every time a judge threatens to send in the baiffs, he's making it harder for his party to win elections because voters don't want chaos. They don't want drama. They want someone who can actually govern. And Trump keeps proving that he can't even sit quietly in a courtroom for a few hours without losing control. Third, there's the question of what happens to Trump's legal strategy if this keeps escalating. Right now, his whole approach is to delay and defy. Delay the trials as long as possible, defy court orders, and hope nothing happens. But that strategy only works if judges let him get away with it. If judges start actually jailing him for contempt, even temporarily, then suddenly delay and defy doesn't work anymore. Because you can't delay a trial from a jail cell. You can't defy a judge who's already proven they're willing to use force. So Trump's entire legal playbook falls apart the moment a judge decides to enforce the rules with actual consequences. And his lawyers know this. They're watching Trump sabotage his own cases, and they can't stop it because Trump doesn't listen to legal advice. He doesn't care about strategy. He cares about looking tough and fighting back and never backing down. And that might work in politics where you can say whatever you want and your base will cheer. But it doesn't work in court. In court, the judge has all the power. And if you piss off the judge, if you violate their orders and disrespect their courtroom, they can destroy you. They can jail you. They can rule against you on every issue. They can make your life a living hell. And Trump is learning that lesson the hard way. Now, let's talk about the bigger picture here. What we're really watching is a clash between two different visions of America. One vision says that laws and institutions and rules matter, that everyone, even the president, has to follow them, that judges have the authority to enforce their orders and maintain the integrity of the legal system. The other vision says that if you're powerful enough, if you have enough supporters and enough money and enough influence, you can do whatever you want. You can ignore rules. You can attack institutions. You can treat the system like it's your personal playground. And Trump represents that second vision completely. So when judges threaten to send in baiffs, when they talk about handcuffs and jail time, they're not just trying to control Trump's behavior. They're trying to defend the first vision of America, the one where institutions matter and nobody is above the law. And that's why this matters so much. Because if Trump wins this fight, if he proves that he can defy courts and nothing will happen, then we've fundamentally changed what kind of country we are. We've said that power trumps law, that defiance trumps compliance, that institutions only matter if powerful people decide to respect them. But if judges win, if they actually enforce their orders and show that even a president has to follow the rules, then maybe we preserve something important. Maybe we prove that the system can still hold, that institutions can still function, that the rule of law isn't just a nice idea, but an actual constraint on power. And that's what's at stake here. Not just whether Trump goes to jail for a few hours, but whether our entire legal system can survive a president who refuses to accept its authority. Here's the bottom line. Trump is on a collision course with the judicial system. He keeps defying orders. He keeps disrespecting judges. He keeps acting like the rules don't apply to him. And judges are running out of patience. They've warned him. They've fined him. They've threatened him with jail. And now we're at the point where the next step is baiffs and marshals physically enforcing compliance. Whether that happens tomorrow or next week or next month, it's coming because Trump won't stop. He can't stop. His whole identity is built on never backing down. So eventually a judge is going to say, enough is enough. And when that happens, we're going to see something that's never happened before in American history. A sitting president being physically restrained by court officers because he refused to follow the law. And when that moment comes, when baiffs step in and courtroom security intervenes, it's going to change everything. It's going to be a defining image of Trump's second term. It's going to be a constitutional crisis. And it's going to force everyone, supporters and critics alike, to decide which vision of America they believe in, the one where laws matter or the one where power is all that counts. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next video. We're covering all of Trump's courtroom drama, all the legal chaos, and all the stories that show just how close we are to a complete meltdown of our institutions. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Should judges actually jail Trump if he keeps defying them, or would that cause more problems than it solves? I'll see you in the next.